Hello, church, and welcome to week 4 of our weekly Bible study we've been releasing on Tuesdays. So whether you're watching that this afternoon on Tuesdays or you're watching it at any point during this week, we like to say thank you for joining in and touching base. I'm going to try to keep this video even as short as possible, but the last few weeks we've been looking at what it means to neighbor well. Loving your neighbor, as the Great Command says. So the first week we look at who our neighbor is, and that's anybody we can come in contact with. The second week we looked at this idea of sorry, I got to remind myself to the interruptions that happen, and the reality is there's nothing more important than who God puts in your life at this point. And then we look at roadblocks. Ultimately, our fear that ultimately is oftentimes the biggest roadblock of when it comes to sharing the love of Christ with people. And today we're gonna just briefly look at two passages, or one verse and a passage about what are our motives for loving our neighbor. Obviously, we're commanded to love our neighbor, but our motives should be different. I want to start off by reading 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 in verse 8 only. It says, Paul writing to the church there, he says, "We loved you so much that we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well, because you had become so dear to us." Paul writing has said, we loved you so much. You are a neighbor. We love you so much. We were delighted not to only share the gospel, but share our life with you. And then I want to turn over to Matthew chapter 5 and the Beatitudes, and into the first part of the Beatitudes, the salt and light passage. Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 13, it says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on the stand. It gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." We know the Great Commission tells us to go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the way you make disciples is by sharing the gospel with people. But the reality is our motives should not just be to drop the gospel bomb on them. And we often do that. We often go into conversations, go into relationships just to drop the gospel bomb. It makes me think of two instances in my life. I remember in college, I spent time in Nashville playing ball, but I worked more than I played. I ended up selling cowboy boots. I knew nothing about cowboy boots, and I had no clue that I was going to be moving to Texas, but I had to fake it till I made it. But one thing I did learn is that as a salesperson, if you can get that person to like you, they will more likely buy your product. So if you could connect with them some way, form, or fashion, and that, as I've gone throughout my life, that makes me think even more about when I interact with salespeople. Some salespeople are excellent about making, hey, I'm for you, you're best bud, I could be your best friend outside of this. But in reality, one, if you don't buy their product, they drop you like yesterday's trash. But also, even if when you buy their product, they might follow up with you here and there. I'm not knocking salespeople. This is just the art of the trade. After they've confirmed the sale, they typically don't have a whole lot else to do with you. Even I think about buying a car, you have the salesperson. As soon as you agree to sign the papers, they shift you to the next person. They shift you to the financial guy, and they might check in there, but they might work for you a little bit. But in reality, there's a whole shift in your relationships. It makes me think about the gospel. If our motive in loving our neighbor is just to purely share the gospel, the relationship will dramatically change as soon as that person sees something is up. And that's hard, because ultimately our goal is to share the gospel. But I love what Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians. He says, "We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel, but our lives." Our motive should be sharing our lives with people, loving them so unconditionally that we are the salt of the world, that we are the light of the world, not just so to a means to an end, a relationship with a means to an end. I know there are times in especially international missions that you want to share, you want to so fervently share the gospel. but we negate the fact that we are called to love them as we are called to love ourselves, and how we are called to love God. And in the midst of that, we definitely have an opportunity to share the gospel. And it just makes me really think about our motives as we go into relationships. One last story, and then I want to close, and there's questions at the end and the link on the Google Forms that you answer. I remember we had some friends that were Muslim that lived behind us for a time being. And this is not here in San Angelo, it was in Florida. But we created this relationship. They would invite us over every single night for a while. Every single week. They would have us over probably every single night. And she cooked fantastic. They loved KP, had a good relationship with them. Then one night we sat down. The first few nights we'd sit down there, eat, then we'd watch TV, hang out. When one night he bust open YouTube and begins to showing me the Muslim faith. And I immediately at that point, my heart changed in how I saw them, not as a negative thing, and I'm not, but it's like, this whole time you wanted to be friends with us just so you could show me that you're right and I'm wrong, or you're trying to convert me to the Islamic faith. And I think about that. How do we do that with our neighbors when we call to love them and to share the gospel with them? And we have to be very mindful that our motives are pure in the sense that we want to love them no matter what. Whether we're able to share the gospel with them in person, or whether we're able to share the gospel just through our light, just through our life by being salt and light. But there may be an opportunity to share. Oh, I pray that we're not fearful. I pray that we're ready. But most importantly, I hope that as we are called to love our neighbor, that we love them unconditionally, and that our motives are right in the way that we love them, not just a means to an end. And that's hard for us as Christians because we want to share the gospel. I'm not saying, obviously, we are called to share the gospel, but our motive also is to love them, to love God and love people. And in the midst of that, we get to share the gospel, whether in word or in deed. So make sure our motives are right as we continue to look at how we can minister to our neighbors throughout the week, and those that live directly around us, or those that we come into contact with. What are our motives? Is our motives to love unconditionally? In the midst of that, get a chance to share the gospel? Or are we just doing a means to an end so we can share the gospel with them? We can check that box off. So I would encourage you and challenge you with that, as I am challenged by that. I hope you have a great rest of your week as it finally has cooled off a little bit. And I hope you enjoy your time of worship this week as we get a chance to worship together again. We love you, and God bless.